Hi everyone, it's Danielle with Northlawn Flower Farm. I'm really excited to shoot this video for you today because today we're going to be direct sowing our fall planted hardy annuals, or our fall planted cool flowers that prefer to be directly sown into the garden. And the flowers that I choose to directly sow in the fall are ones that are hardy in my zone. So there are about 35 cool flowers, and if a cool flower is hardy in your zone, I'm here in zone 6B, southern Pennsylvania. So if a cool flower is hardy in my zone, that means it can survive the winter in my zone. I can plant it now in the fall, 6 weeks before the first fall frost, have it develop into a beautiful little baby plant, and then just sit there over the winter. It will survive my winter here, the snow, the ice, the freezing temperatures, without any form of protection. And then in the very, very early spring, it will take off. It has a wonderful, healthy root system ready to go. And because I planted it in the fall, it will result in a stronger plant, a taller plant, a healthier plant, and what's not to love about those three things, right? And how I determine whether or not to direct sow a cool flower or start it about a month to 6 weeks earlier in cells or by soil blocking is based completely on what that particular seed needs. Every seed is a little bit different, and so it's not what myself, Danielle, wants to do with the seed, but it's what the seed wants and what's going to give me the best success rate with that seed. So if I were to plant nigella like we're going to today directly in the garden, it's going to do great. It's the right time of year to direct sow nigella. It germinates quickly and easily outside, and it will result in a wonderful stand of plants. However, if I were to direct something, say like Rudbeckia at this time of year, it takes a lot longer to get established. I may lose a lot of those seeds along the process. And so instead I choose to sow Rudbeckia in cells and then transplant it out into the garden because that's what's best for Rudbeckia. That can get a little bit confusing. So let me just share with you exactly what I'm going to direct sow into the garden today, 6 weeks before my first fall frost. And also I'm looking for nighttime temperatures in the mid to low 60s. So it's September 15th right now. We're about to also get some rain later today, so it's a great time to be direct sowing. And it's about 6 weeks before my first fall frost, which is generally late October for me. So what I'm going to be sowing directly in the garden today is nigella, also known as love in a mist. I'm going to be sowing larkspur. I've had this larkspur in my freezer for many weeks now. That's something I always like to do with larkspur seed. Bachelor's buttons do really well direct sown into the garden this time of year. Buplurum is a wonderful foliage or filler depending on how you look at it, and I like to direct sow it into the garden in the fall. Whitefinch orlaya does wonderful directly sown into the garden. And then we're also going to be direct sowing dara into the garden. Now what I'm going to do is right here, I'm going to put a list of all the cool flowers that do well directly sown into the garden, and I'm going to put the hardiness zone next to each one. That way if you want to pause the video here and see the cool flowers that do really well directly sown into the garden, you can just take note of that on the screen. So I really hope that's helpful, and now let's head over to my raised beds and talk about some prep work that's really important when it comes to direct seeding cool flowers to set you up for success and also to maintain success throughout the winter and spring season when weeds like chickweed can really become a serious problem. So if you've been following along on the channel, you might remember that we had the beautiful straw flower in this bed. In the bed right next to me here, we had 2 different kinds of snapdragons, and then we came in with a succession of double quick sunflowers. There's probably a bed over here that you might not be able to see in the screen that we're also going to turn into a cool flowers bed that had anemones, pincushion flower, and then another wave of sunflowers come through it. But all of these are changing over to cool flowers beds. So what I want to do is remove the crop that I was growing from that area, fully weed the bed until there's no weed in sight, and then I like to add in a good 2 to 3 inches of compost into the planting area. Now after I add in that 2 to 3 inch layer of compost, I rake the area with my rake really well so it's really nice and level, nice crumbly soil, ready for direct sowing. It's free of any weeds, at least all the weeds I can see at the time. And then I like to do something that I didn't do early on. I don't think it's mentioned in Cool Flowers, but it's something that I really find necessary here in a setting where I'm not using landscape fabric. And that is to, before I even sow a seed in the ground, I mulch in between where I'm going to place my seeds. I have used wood chips in the past, straw. This year I'm just using grass clippings and some leaves that came up with my grass. That'll work just fine. I've done that before. But putting some kind of barrier on the earth where you won't be direct seeding anything. And I've really found this such an important step, and it will really save you come next spring, because when those spring weeds, those early spring weeds like chickweed, start to germinate, you will have this mulch in place to prevent them from germinating, because you're going to be starting here the seeds. They're going to be baby plants, and they're going to be kind of low basal plants to the ground. So by the time we enter into our first frost, I'm going to have this nice stand of low growing basal foliage, but there's still all this space here in between the rows for just tons of weeds to come in and grow. So really, by mulching in between the rows before I even sow a seed into the ground, just saves me so much trouble come spring. And for me, when it comes to Cool Flowers, the goal is really to make life easier. I want to have better plants at the end of the day, but I also want this process to be easy. If I'm having to go out and put on and off row cover every single day over the winter, or if I'm having to weed these beds every other day come spring, have I really made my life easier by doing this fall planting? Not really. I really feel like taking these preventative steps in the fall are crucial and will set you up for success going into spring. So with that being said, we can really get on to direct seeding some of these cool flowers. So these 5 rows are going to be nigella, the following 4 rows are going to be bachelor's buttons, 5 rows of larkspur, and then 5 rows of orlaya, 5 rows of buplurum. And by that point, we'll be doing really great, and we can move on to how our seedlings are looking for transplanting. So now that we've done all this prep work, we basically set ourselves up for success right from the beginning, and we can get to planting. So in this bed, I think like I mentioned, we're gonna do bachelor's buttons and nigella. Both of those go into the ground 1/4 of an inch down. They need darkness to germinate. So I'm growing 2 different varieties of bachelor's buttons this year. The first one is Jubilee Gem, very similar to Blue Boy. And then I'm going to grow Black Magic, very similar to, I think it was Black Button that I grew this spring. So let's get these in the ground now. I think I want to do the blue here because I'm going to do my blue nigella there. Then I think we'll have the nice Jubilee Gem here. And then in the back, we'll have this beautiful maroon color. So to start with, I like to use my grandma's trowel. 1/4 of an inch isn't much at all. So I'll just make a little tunnel here for my seeds. And when I direct sow, I like to direct sow very heavily. A lot of things can happen. Voles, mice, birds, weed pressure. And so even though I want these plants to end up at about a 6 by 6 inch spacing, I'm probably gonna drop a seed, I would say almost every inch. That's how heavily I'm gonna seed, because think of everything they're going to go through, not just the pests like I mentioned, but also just you might have some loss over the winter. So why not go a little bit heavier, especially seed is so inexpensive. I like to buy a lot of my seed for Cool Flowers from Roar Seed and Supply. This is not sponsored at all. I have bought these seed, I always buy from them. They're a local seed company. I find that they have more seed in their packet for the least amount of money than any other seed supplier I've ever come across. And now they don't carry everything, but in terms of like nigella, bachelor's buttons, larkspur, all those things are 99 cents. And then they have these like seed packets. This is 1/2 ounce of seed. And what did I pay for this? I think I might be only paid $2.50 for this, but you won't find a better price than them if they do carry what you need. So let's go ahead and sow this seed now. It's It's funny, a lot of these cool flowers, the seeds, they almost have a badminton look to them, especially your scabiosas. Now that they're in the ground, I'll just go ahead, cover them back up with soil. I like to give just a little tap to my soil just to ensure good seed to soil contact. And then once I have some rows planted, I want to go ahead and water it in really well. And then we want to make sure we're keeping the seed bed evenly moist at all times. What I like to do is to water every single morning if it hasn't rained that day or isn't expecting to rain. So what I do is just make it part of my daily chores. I drop my daughter off at school about 7 in the morning. As soon as I get back here at 7:15, water all of my cool flowers. Some of these cool flowers, like your bachelor's buttons and your nigella, they germinate in about 7 to 14 days. But once we move on to our larkspur takes about 14 to 28 days to germinate. That's a long time. It's almost a whole month. So if the seed bed is allowed to dry out for, say, an entire week, you might have an issue with that seed germinating ever. So just kind of think about what's a time of day where you can always go out and water your cool flowers until they're well established. Now, if you're just getting started with cool flowers and maybe you just want to give one a go this first year, and you're in a zone where bachelor's buttons are hardy, I would definitely try bachelor's buttons. I think they're the easiest cool flower to grow. They're easy to germinate. They want to grow for you. And then if you do, say, a summer planting of bachelor's buttons and observe the difference, I think you'll be hooked on cool flowers, because bachelor's buttons, or any cool flower grown in the cool part of the season when they want to be grown, is going to be so much taller, so much stronger, more stems per plant, and really that disease resistance is what I'm seeing more and more. If I had to choose another one, I would say either nigella or orlaya. I do hear some people having trouble with orlaya, and I had trouble with it also when I used to start it inside. But once I started to just directly sow it into the garden and just barely cover it with soil, just like it does on its own. Just if I had a stand of orlaya here and I let it go to seed, that's kind of how it would drop its seed and it would barely cover itself. I find that I get almost, I mean, I can't say 100 germinate. Can you guys see Rocky? Rocky, you need some water. You need me to get you, fill up your water bottle. Rocky, what are you doing? I think I need to fill up Rocky's water bowl after this. But what was I saying? Oh yeah, orlaya is one that's really easy to grow, does great with its seed directly sown into the soil. Got all those bachelor's buttons in, so let's go ahead and come in with our nigella now. I was reading this great book a couple years ago. I think it's called Heirloom Flowers. I'll try to link it in the description. It's a really great book, especially if you find yourself really loving nostalgia, but it talks about old flowers, heirloom flowers. I love nigella seed. It's like a little black dot, so fun. But it was talking about how a lot of people call nigella devil in a bush. That was the first time I had ever heard that. Seems like a funny name for such a beautiful flower, but I guess they must be referring to the seed pod that it leaves behind. Once again, this lavender mist is going to be thinned eventually to about a 6 by 6 inch spacing. So my rows are 6 inches apart, but I'm not really worried about that spacing right now when I'm direct seeding. I'll thin that out come very early spring. And I've even found that a lot of these cool flowers do well at even closer spacing. Like the larkspur last year, I left at about a 4 by 4 inch spacing, and I was really happy with that. And it even seemed to help them all stand upright. One other reason why you would want to direct sow a cool flower versus starting it inside, you could think about it like this, is that if a seed germinates so easily and readily outside in the garden, why take up valuable space under your lighting system with those seeds? Now sure, I could grow bachelor's buttons and larkspur. Well, larkspur might be a little more challenging, but I could grow bachelor's buttons and nigella inside the home. But that's valuable potting soil, valuable time I have to spend tending to those flowers inside. Then they have to get acclimated to the outside. But really for me, it's just about space under my lights. I only have 8 lights for half an acre. And so I really have to be picky about what goes under them and what goes directly out here in the garden. Now we'll just get this seed covered up. Nice seed to soil contact. I love direct seeding. I love starting seeds indoors, but there is something incredibly special about putting a seed directly into the earth and letting nature do the rest. I think I've talked about this watering can before, but this is a Dram 5-liter watering can. I can link it. They do sell them on Amazon. I have no idea why, but the color seems to influence the price of the watering can. But I really love this watering can, especially with the amount of direct seeding that I enjoy doing, because, well, first of all, if you plant, say, a shrub and you want kind of a stronger stream of water right there at the root zone, you can just take the rows off. You can point the rows down for a more directed stream and a stronger stream, or say I have a seed that needs to be sown on top of the soil surface, the one that doesn't need darkness to germinate, I would turn it upward, and I'll show you how that stream goes because it's much more of a rain effect than kind of a steady downward stream. So here's the rosette pointing upward, but for seeds that like darkness to germinate, I actually like it pointing downwards because I can direct the flow of water just on the soil and not on my mulch. But if I was broadcasting seed over a whole area, I think pointing the rosette up is really nice. And I think that's the way they recommend working it, is having the rosette pointing upwards. So let's go ahead and move on to probably my personal favorite cool flower now, the larkspur. If you love hummingbirds and you want to try the cool flowers concept, I would definitely recommend a planting of larkspur. My personal favorite is the imperial blue larkspur. You know, there are lots of other great, it's a little bit too much mulch here. There are lots of great new colors on the market. There's that dusty purple, there's pinks, there's whites, but you know, the one I go back to is kind of that standard blue that's been around forever. Got that tip on putting your larkspur in the freezer. I think it was in Florette's book, Cut Flower Gardening, that I saw that tip. But to be honest with you, I've never tried not freezing it. I just saw her tip and I've always just stuck mine in the freezer at least 2 weeks prior to planting. And once again, these seeds are from Rohr's. This was 99 cents for 0.5 grams. One comment that I see a lot that is a really great point is that a lot of these cool flowers will just readily do this in the garden. They are done blooming when things get hot. They set seed in July and August. They just naturally drop their seed at the right time of year, and then they start growing again. They're basically doing the cool flower concept all on their own. The main difference is that when you're growing cut flowers for the purpose of cutting all the flowers and selling all the flowers, you're not necessarily able to leave any flowers behind to go to seed. So while if you are planting cool flowers in a border and not cutting them, probably a lot of them would readily self-seed themselves and come back and perform this cool flower concept all on their own. But when you're cutting and selling the flowers and there's no flowers being left behind, the plants don't really have a chance to do that. And most of the time here, at least on my space where I'm constantly needing to flip the beds over again, I'm just not able to leave a crop in the ground in order for it to self-seed. I really need to flip that bed in order to get as much productivity out of my space as possible. But if you are growing cool flowers in a garden setting and enjoying them as a landscape planting, I bet you'll find, especially with things like larkspur and nigella, buplurum, that they all readily self-seed themselves. And so if you were doing cool flowers for garden enjoyment and you didn't plan on cutting them, there's a good chance that you might only have to do this once, and then nature will just kind of take care of the rest for you. So we'll just get this larkspur covered up. We'll get it watered in. And then we'll move on to a bed that I don't have fully prepped yet. I need to get it mulched up first, and then we can direct sow some orlaya and some buplurum. So by the time, hi Grace, hi sweetheart. Oh, you gonna give me a kiss? Love you too. By the time the September garden tour rolls around, we should be able to see most of these things. I would not necessarily think that the larkspur would be up at that time, but we'll definitely be able to see signs of the bachelor's buttons, the nigella, the orlaya. Definitely we'll see those. Buplurum and larkspur. We may have to wait until the October garden tour to see them. But if you ever want to look back and see this concept throughout an entire growing season, I do have a playlist, a Cool Flowers playlist. If you want to see really how this concept works, if you want to see how heavy my winter season is, and just see what has been working and also not working for me here in an area that is really kind of a hot and humid environment in the summer, then very cold, snowy, and icy and wet. I think the overwhelming thing about my climate and my particular land is wet. So let's get this bed ready for planting now. This is going to be half orlaya and half buplurum. I already added in all my compost the other day. So now I just need to rake it smooth and remove any kind of big twigs. I do cool composting, so a lot of times I'll have really big twigs still in that compost. I want to get those out before we direct seed. And we'll grab some mulch and get this mulched up and ready for planting. So I like to do orlaya and buplurum at 9 by 9 inch spacing. And I'm putting these in the same bed because I anticipate supporting them with hortanova. Anything that I want to support with hortanova, I try to put in the same bed. That way I don't have one bed that needs hortanova mixed in with the planting of something that doesn't need it. Sorry the light's a little strange now, friends, but let's go ahead and move on with our orlaya. I've seen some people say not to cover orlaya. I have always done what the back of the Johnny's seed packet says, and they say to just cover lightly. So that's what I've always done, and it's worked good for me so far. I don't know, friends. This says 100 seeds. I don't think I got 100 seeds in here. Does that look like 100 seeds to you? I may have to come in here with some dara also, from the looks of this. I'm gonna count these in my head as I go along, because that looks more like 50 seeds than 100. So friends, that's a little bit strange. I'm not really sure what happened there with the amount of seed, but I'm just gonna roll with it. I was only able to seed 2 rows of buplurum, so I'll have to do another succession of buplurum in the summer because 2 rows is not really enough for what I need. But I'm just gonna make the best of it and go ahead and fill up the remainder of these 3 rows with my dara. And then before we say goodbye, I want to go ahead and show you how my cool flower transplants are looking. They need about 1 more week to go into the ground, and that'll work out great because I want to get 1 more cutting off my zinnias, 1 more harvest off my tomatoes, and then my tomato and my zinnia bed are going to turn also into cool flower beds that we're going to do cool flower transplants. Okay friends, we have everything direct seeded, mulched, watered in, and my job moving forward is just to make sure and water those areas every single day if it doesn't rain. And I'll make sure and give you guys updates as things move along. And speaking of updates, I wanted to update you on what my cool flower transplants are looking like at the moment, and then I'll show you where they're going to be going in just a few days. Today is Thursday. I'll be harvesting for the stand tomorrow night, selling those flowers, and then by Monday morning when my daughter goes to school, I'll be able to rip those beds out and plant these transplants in. So these transplants aren't ginormous, but they're healthy, and what I'm really looking for is that the root system fills the cell tray, and at that point I feel good about transplanting them out into the garden. So if I look at the base here, I'm not sure if the camera will focus or not, but I can see the roots have reached the bottom of the cell, and if I just pop one out, hopefully you can see there that it's got a pretty good root system going on, but certainly 1 more week or at least 5 more days in this tray won't hurt anybody. At this point, they're just living outside on my porch. They've started the hardening off process and they can just continue to grow on outside now that they're established. So this area where we have the beautiful queen lime with red zinnias is going to be replaced with that gorgeous dianthus. The tomatoes back there is going to be replaced with scabiosa and rudbeckia that's also been started in trays. My tray of campanula, or Canterbury bells, other words, that I was trying to grow this year was a complete and utter fail. I think I only had about 4 of the seeds germinate. Those look fine, but they're incredibly tiny. So any tips you have on growing campanula from seed, please let me know, because I've always wanted to grow that, just never got around to it. This year I got around to growing it and I just happened to have a major fail, and I'm not sure why. The dahlia bed up here is going to stay empty over the winter, and it's going to turn into snapdragons in very early spring. Behind that we have a bed of nigella. The nigella is going to turn into my tulip bed. The area where we have the Mexican bush sage and the celosia right in front of that larkspur, I'm going to be trialing some new daffodils for Longfield Gardens. They're going to go there. And then there's 2 more beds in the back that have nasturtiums, marigolds, peppers, those kind of things. Those 2 beds are also going to be reserved for very early spring planted cool flowers. Things that I can't plant right now because those flowers aren't hardy in my zone, but I want to leave those beds available over the winter and kind of just mulch them up over the winter so that as soon as very early spring planting time arrives, which is 6 to 8 weeks, before the last spring frost that those beds are open and ready to go for me with things like straw flower. So that's the plan for cool flowers this year. Let me know what you're getting around to in terms of cool flowers, or if you have any questions, I'm always here to help. I think cool flowers is just such a wonderful learning experience. It's going to be vastly different based on not only your zone, but also your climate. And remember, your first and last frost date determine when to plant cool flowers. Your hardiness zone tells you what flowers can be fall planted. And all of us, no matter what zone we're in, can do a very early spring planting. And I'll be sure to just continue to take you along for the journey and the successes and failures that inevitably happen along the way. Well, I want to wish you a great day and happy gardening. Bye.